You are watching Shadowin, where the stories are real, and the fear is too. Okay, so I got this story submitted, and I read it, and immediately felt this heavy nausea, It's the kind of thing that makes you question the stability of the entire damn universe, which is exactly why we're doing it. This first entry, which the author called The Break Room Clock, is seriously messed up, and involves a guy named Ethan, and what happens when the 9-to-5 grind breaks logic. So I was working at this warehouse, right? Distribution for office supplies. It was the worst. I needed the cash though, because I was trying to pay off this weird dental bill that kept getting misfiled, and they were threatening collections. Whatever. The point is, I was stuck working 10-hour shifts, sorting boxes of printer paper and toner in a building that smelled permanently like industrial carpet cleaner and cheap microwave popcorn. My only real interaction with anybody, outside of clocking in and out, was the break room. It was hideous. Fluorescent lights that hummed so loud it gave you an instant headache. Walls that were that awful institutional vomit beige color, and a digital clock above the coffee machine. That clock is important. It was one of those cheap black clocks, the kind that flashes 12 o'clock if the power flickers, except this one had a faint red display. It was always accurate, almost aggressively so, because nobody had time to be late at the warehouse. The people were mostly ghosts. But there was this one guy, Marcus. Marcus worked receiving. Super clean cut, maybe late 30s. Always wore these pressed khakis, which in a warehouse environment is just asking for stains. But he never had a single mark on him. He was a vegetarian, I think. He'd bring in this exact same Tupperware container every day, filled with, quinoa and salmon salad, and he would eat it perfectly, using tiny bites and a clean, slow rhythm. Dude was meticulous to the point of being unsettling. We never talked much, except maybe, "Hey," or "Don't take the last coffee." One Tuesday, I was running on maybe 3 hours of sleep, mostly because my neighbors were fighting about a pet parrot that morning. I was totally dragging. I remember it was 2:45 p.m. I went to the break room because my head was throbbing. I'd forgotten my painkillers that morning, a classic move, and I really needed to slam down a lukewarm Diet Coke. Marcus was already there, sitting at the far table, spooning the salmon salad. The clock on the wall said 2:45. I popped the soda, took a massive gulp, and then I realized I hadn't smoked all day. I need my nicotine, man. It's the only thing that keeps me from staring into the void during my shift. I grabbed my jacket, told Marcus I'd be back in 10, and I stepped out the back door, past the local. I lit up, scrolled through Reddit for exactly 9 minutes. I timed it, I swear, and tossed the butt. It was chilly out, which was a relief from the stale heat inside. I pushed the heavy door back open, stomped my feet off on the disgusting floor mat, and walked back toward the break room. As soon as I entered, the humming from the lights felt louder, and I got this sudden, intense wave of déjà vu, like I was about to sneeze. But the sneeze never came. I stopped dead in the doorway. Marcus was sitting at the far table. He was spooning the salmon salad. He was wearing the same expression, slightly vacant, focused entirely on chewing. The clock on the wall said 2:45. My can of Diet Coke, which I had definitely opened and taken a massive swig from, was sitting on the counter, closed and full. There wasn't a single ring of moisture on the counter where I'd put it down, and the little tab was flush against the top. I just stared at the clock. 2:45. I figured, okay, maybe my brain is fried. Maybe I looked at my phone timer wrong. Maybe the clock lost a few seconds when I was outside. Or maybe my memory of what time I left was just completely gone due to lack of sleep and pain. Whatever. I was tired. I opened the Diet Coke again. The hiss was identical to the one I thought I'd heard 9 minutes ago. "Rough day?" Marcus asked, not looking up, just gently wiping a smudge of salmon from the edge of the Tupperware. "Yeah, dude. Freaking terrible," I said, leaning against the counter. I took the massive gulp, got my fix, and walked back out. This time I didn't go far. I went to the end of the hall, leaned against a vending machine, and kept an eye on the break room door. I waited exactly 10 minutes. 2:55 p.m. I pushed the door open. Empty. Just the institutional beige walls and the humming lights. The clock read 2:55. Okay, normal. I took 2 steps in, and the lights gave a tiny flicker, just enough to catch the attention. I looked up at the digital clock. It flashed. 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock. Then, snap. It settled on 2:45. And Marcus was there. He was sitting at the far table, the exact same spot. The Tupperware was open. He was taking his first, slow, perfect bite of the salmon salad. I literally felt the soda I just drunk try to come back up. I backed up slowly. I wanted to just sprint out the door, but I was frozen, just watching him chew. He still hadn't acknowledged me. It was like I was watching a recording that had just been rewound and started over, except I was still moving forward. I reached into my pocket, and I pulled out the cigarette butt I just extinguished 9 minutes ago. It was crumpled and faintly damp. I had proof. I walked right up to the table. My heart was going like a damn trapped bird. "Marcus," I whispered. He looked up, finally. His eyes were perfectly clear, totally unbothered. "Ethan, you forgot your soda," he said, and he pointed with his fork. I looked back. The Diet Coke can, which I had just held in the hallway, was sitting on the counter, closed and full. My mind was screaming that this was a panic attack, that I had somehow just done a full circle and was now repeating my actions. But my exhaustion was still there. My missing headache medicine was still missing, and the cigarette butt was still hot in my hand. I threw the butt down on the laminate floor. It left a tiny black smudge. "Dude, what the hell is happening?" I said, trying to keep my voice low. "It's 2:45. I was just here." Marcus looked at the clock, then at the butt on the floor, then back at me. He didn't look scared or confused. He looked mildly annoyed, like I'd interrupted a crucial point in his meal. "It's 2:45, Ethan. It always is," he said. "No, it isn't. I was outside. The time was moving. Now it's back." I was gesturing wildly. "I saw the clock jump back. Did you see the light flicker?" Marcus sighed, the kind of professional, exhausted sigh you give when a coworker asks a really dumb question. He slowly reached across the table, picked up the cigarette butt, and dropped it into his empty salmon salad container. "The clock has been stuck at 2:45 for about 6 months now," Marcus said flatly. "It never moves. Everyone knows that. You just started here. You must not have noticed." He closed the lid on the Tupperware. I looked at the clock. 2:45. The display was steady. It didn't look broken. It looked fine. It just looked like 2:45. I turned back to him. "You're lying. I literally saw it change. I saw 2:55 a second ago. 2:45, Marcus correct, pulling a wet wipe out of his pocket to clean his hands. Why would you think the time was changing? I didn't have an answer. I was looking at his hands. He was wiping them clean, and the wipe looked exactly like the one he'd pulled out 9 minutes ago. Or maybe 6 months ago, I don't know. I needed to focus on the numbers, but I kept picturing the sound that plastic spoon made against the Tupperware. Clink, clink. Always the same sound. I didn't stay to argue. I just muttered that I was sick and needed to leave. I practically ran back to my supervisor's office, told him I was quitting effective immediately, and started packing up my small locker. He kept saying, "You sure you don't want to think about this? You've only been here 3 weeks." 3 weeks. Right. Except I had this sickening feeling that I'd been there for 3 weeks. Or maybe 3 seconds. Or maybe the time I'd been there had just been reset to 0 every time I stepped out of the break room. I didn't get my final check until 3 weeks later. When I cashed it, I realized the hours were completely wrong. They only paid me for the hours I worked before that Tuesday afternoon. It was like the company's system, or the universe's record or something, had totally wiped the entire loop from the official record. I still drive past that warehouse sometimes. I don't go in. But here's the thing, dude. I was waiting for a train the other month, totally separate city, right? And this guy walks onto the platform carrying an oversized backpack and a large Tupperware container. It was Marcus. He was waiting for the train. It was 11:15 a.m., according to my phone. He looked over at me, and he didn't smile, but he didn't look surprised either. He just lifted the Tupperware slightly, like acknowledging a shared secret. And I swear, I heard a faint, high-pitched humming sound, just like the fluorescent lights in that horrible break room. And I felt, for a split second, that dizzying nausea, like my internal clock had just flashed 12 o'clock. I don't know what Marcus is. I don't know if he just lives in an endless, looping time, or if he's the thing that causes the loop. But now, whenever I look at a digital clock, I feel a cold sweat. Because if time can just get stuck at 2:45 in a beige office supply warehouse, then maybe it's not really moving anywhere for any of us. Maybe we just think it is. I don't know what to say to that. The idea of time being local and tied to a single, really bored coworker is truly horrifying. It's the banality of that terror, you know? All right, moving on, because I need to stop thinking about perfect, unmoving salmon salad. This next entry is really, truly visceral. It deals with 2 guys working long-haul trips for a utility company, and the escalating strangeness they encounter in their work vehicle. The author titled this one, and I feel like this title tells you everything you need to know. The driver's seat was wet. This happened about 5 years ago, when I was doing maintenance runs for Allied Telecom in the Midwest, mostly remote tower checks. It meant long stretches of absolute nothing, just me and whoever I was paired with, usually Gary. Gary was fine. Loud chewing, though. That's the main thing I remember about Gary. He was always covered in orange dust from flamin' hot Cheetos. Didn't matter if we were pulling into a site or driving 8 hours. His fingers were orange. His shirt had dust. And sometimes you could even see little flakes in his beard. We drove a company-issued Ford Escape. Late model, but absolutely trashed inside. It smelled like stale coffee, sweat, and cheap synthetic air freshener trying desperately to cover up something much worse. We were near the border of Indiana and Illinois, driving back from inspecting this massive, archaic radio array that looked like something out of a 1950s government film.
It was dead quiet out there. Just cornfields and static. The weirdness started when we stopped at a place called Betty's Pit Stop, which looked like it hadn't been painted since Nixon was in office.
I went in to grab a coffee refill and a pack of gum, and Gary went to the bathroom. When I got back to the car, Gary was already in the passenger seat, strapping in. "That bathroom was freaking nasty, man," he mumbled, wiping his mouth. He looked pale. "Yeah, they usually are out here," I said, opening the driver's side door. And that's when I noticed it. The driver's seat was wet. Not damp, wet. I ran my hand over the dark gray cloth seat. It felt cold and soaked, like a towel that hadn't been wrung out. "Dude, did you spill something?" I asked Gary. "What the hell? It's soaking." Gary looked over, chewing on a pretzel rod he must have bought inside. "Nah, man, it wasn't me. Did you leave the window down when we were at that tower? Maybe it rained." I looked up. The sky was perfectly clear, mid-July blue. The asphalt was bone dry. "It hasn't rained in 4 days," I told him, confused. I didn't smell water. It didn't smell like coffee. It smelled thick, like lake silt, but somehow metallic too, and cold. I put a jacket over the seat and drove. It was irritating having my jeans get clammy, but we had to keep going. I kept looking at Gary. He seemed fine, chewing his pretzel, scrolling through his phone. Over the next few days, the wetness didn't dry. In fact, it seemed to spread a little. Every time I got in the car after a stop, the seat was just as soaked. We started using plastic bags and towels, but it always seeped through. Gary stopped noticing it after a while. I kept bringing it up. "Gary, seriously, touch the seat. It's gross." "I don't know, man," he'd mumble. "Maybe the AC unit is leaking condensation into the seat foam. It's an old Ford." That sounded plausible, I guess. But the smell was getting worse. It went from metallic silt to something genuinely awful, like a combination of rotting leaves and ozone. Then we got to a small town called Morrow. We were crashing in a motel that smelled like stale chlorine and bad intentions. We argued about the temperature. Gary wanted the AC on blast. I wanted it off because the sound gave me tinnitus. I ended up putting my earbuds in and trying to sleep, listening to some awful 90s ska band. I woke up at maybe 4:30 a.m., dead quiet. I had to pee really badly. I rolled over. Gary's bed was empty. His stuff was still there, the terrible plaid suitcase, a mountain of used tissues, his phone charging, but he wasn't. I figured he was either in the bathroom or had gone out for a smoke. I went to the bathroom, came back. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. I walked to the door and looked out. The parking lot was empty, save for our Ford Escape and 2 rusty semi-trucks. I called his name softly. Nothing. I grabbed his phone, checked it. No messages, no calls. I went outside to the car. The passenger door was locked. I used the key fob to open it. The passenger seat was soaking wet, completely saturated. It glistened slightly in the weak parking lot light. It was worse than the driver's seat had ever been. And Gary was gone. No sign of a struggle, no blood, nothing. His backpack was wedged under the seat, and his sunglasses were resting on the dash. I started screaming his name, stumbling around the parking lot. The semi-drivers just watched me from their cabs. I called my supervisor. I couldn't stop shaking. "Gary's gone. He just disappeared." My supervisor, Ted, was totally useless. Gary who? We don't have a Gary listed on that route, Ethan. Are you sure you're not confusing your partners? Yes, Gary. The guy who loves Cheetos. We've been driving for a week. Ted kept insisting the only person assigned to that escape was me, and that I was supposed to be working solo this week due to budget cuts. I felt like I was losing it. I went back to the motel room, checking Gary's plaid suitcase. His name was even embroidered on the inside tag. G. Davis. I called Ted back, practically yelling. I have his suitcase, man. I have his phone. Ted just sighed. Ethan, you need to calm down. You're stressed. Take the day off and drive home tomorrow. I sat on the bed and stared at the empty space where Gary should be. Had he just walked out? Run away? But why leave his phone? I went back to the car a few hours later, in the daylight. That's when I noticed the details. The driver's seat was now mostly dry, just tacky. But the passenger seat was actively dripping. I leaned in and looked at the wetness closely. It wasn't clear water. It was a murky, dark brown, and it had floating bits. Not dirt. Tiny, almost microscopic flakes. Then I looked at the dashboard. Gary's sunglasses were still sitting there, right where he always put them. But they weren't sitting on the dash. They were partially embedded in the plastic. The frames were fused with the material, like they had been slowly dissolved and then molded back into the soft vinyl. I reached out to touch the seatbelt buckle on the passenger side. It was cool, smooth metal. But right next to where the buckle retracted, there was a small, unmistakable patch of bright orange dust. It wasn't on the surface. It was in the plastic, swirled like a dye. Cheeto dust, fused into the material of the car. It felt like the car was slowly absorbing him, not dissolving, but integrating the parts that were important. His habits, his mess, the things he touched constantly. I remembered the smell, that thick, metallic, silt-like smell. It was the smell of the car processing the organic matter. I had this terrifying flash of clarity, that maybe Gary hadn't walked away, but that he was now literally part of the Ford escape. He was the condensation. He was the persistent, disgusting smell. He was the orange dye, and the wetness was whatever process that takes. I tried to start the car. It started fine, but the radio immediately flared up with static. And in the static, I heard something. A rapid clicking sound. It was the sound of someone loudly, rapidly chewing something crunchy, followed by a wheezing sigh that sounded exactly like Gary whenever he tried to complain about the heat. I shut off the car, jumped out, and started walking. I left the escape running, unlocked, right there in the motel parking lot. I didn't care if it got stolen. I just needed to be away from it. I walked for hours until I hit the highway and hitchhiked back to Indianapolis. I quit Allied Telecom that week. I told them I had a nervous breakdown. I didn't mention Gary because the thought of hearing them say, "Gary who?" again, felt like it would break my brain entirely. I haven't driven a car since. I take public transit exclusively. Sometimes, when the bus is idling at a red light and it's pouring rain outside, I get that specific smell, that dark, metallic, wet scent, and I can feel my feet itching with an imaginary dampness. And I look around, feeling sick, half expecting to see a permanent, bright orange streak dyed into the seat fabric. But the worst part is, sometimes, late at night, I'll be watching a movie, and I'll hear a quick, loud, wet crunch sound. And I know, logically, it's just the film soundtrack or something. But every time I hear it, I stop breathing. Because I know that sound. That's Gary, still chewing, somewhere in the endless stretch of highway, forever fused with the wet driver's seat of a company car. If those stories felt like they were peeling back the layers of reality, then welcome to Shadowin. If you want more stories that don't give you any closure and leave you deeply disturbed,
Make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications.